Hi, welcome to my presentation on WebSockets versus HTTP requests. This is a presentation for BYU IS 542 with Dr. Little. A little introduction about myself. My name is Tyler Baer. I'm getting my master's in civil engineering from BYU. My research involves web development. I've created a few web apps for storing, editing, viewing, running, and analyzing water distribution networks. And my main focus is software engineering. That's what I hope to go into after I graduate. So, as I said, this is a presentation about WebSockets versus HTTP requests. I'm assuming that most of us have heard of at least HTTP requests and probably have used them in our web development. So, which is better and why? I actually created a presentation for a class I took last semester on SQL versus no SQL, and I was reminded of that discussion when studying WebSockets. You know, I came into this thinking that WebSockets was this new, amazing technology that was gonna kind of get rid of HTTP requests, but as I learned, it's not meant to replace HTTP requests, and there's no it's really situational on which one is better. There's no ultimate answer there, similar to SQL and no SQL if you're familiar with those two database structures. So let me first talk about HTTP requests. Every time a client wants to retrieve data from a server, a connection needs to be established. So a client sends a request, the server receives that request, and then processes the request and sends a response back to the client. So, like I said, each time the client wants to receive some data from the server, a connection needs to be made. And each time that connection is made, there's a little bit of overhead. So in this example shown on this slide, you know, the client made three requests, got three responses, and had to open three separate connections with the server. With WebSockets, there only needs to be one connection made with the server. So once the client connects with the server, makes that initial handshake, the server can send data at any time, and the client can handle receiving that data, and the client can also send other requests to the server. This is really useful when you need to have low latency with data interactions on your web application, and we'll talk about some of the common use cases for WebSockets later in the presentation. But to showcase both of these request types, the HTTP request and WebSockets, I'm going to demo two web applications that I found at this link right here. It's a really good, another good YouTube video discussing HTTP requests and how they relate to WebSockets. So let me just go into the demo really quickly. So this first app is just a very, very simple app using Ajax, which is an extremely common way to in web development to execute HTTP requests. So this is just a button that the developer made. Once it's clicked, all it does is basically send a request to the server and it gets back a random welcome message. This is from a presentation made for PyCon. I think it was like, you know, an international Python convention. So that's why it says he's addressing the PyCon community. So every time we click this button, we can see that separate requests are being made in this network tab of the developer tools in Chrome. So we can see that it's HTTPS URL, and each time, like I said, we make that connection, send a request and get a request back. So the next app is sort of like a messaging app. You can input your name and put a little message that gets displayed here. So we can post that. And as you can see, no new item in this networks tab table showed up. That's because all of these posts that I've created, and if I create a new one, they're all contained within this one connection right here. You can notice that it's not an HTTPS URL, it's a WSS, which means it's a, well, let's see if we can get it to show up. I can click on it and it's a WebSocket. So the connection is upgraded, basically meaning it's upgraded to this WebSocket protocol. Yeah, here we see WebSockets. So a really useful tool when using WebSockets is the frame tab. So every time we post or send or receive information from the server through this single connection, it gets registered in this frames tag, so we can see that we can see each of these posts that I've been making there. So that is kind of a breakdown of the difference between Ajax and this WebSockets. If we wanted to create a similar feel for an app using HTTP requests, like a messaging app, we may have to add a button here that says refresh the server or something to pull those recently posted messages. It couldn't just have that open communication like the WebSockets. So yeah, messaging apps are definitely a really common use case for WebSockets over HTTP requests. So some of the other common, like I said, chatting apps are a real common application for WebSockets. Another one is games. Games rely heavily on that client and server communication. There's pretty much constant communication with the server. Same with chatting apps. So within these two realms of technology, WebSockets are very common. But basically, like I mentioned before, anything that needs low latency communication between the server is a good candidate for maybe checking out WebSockets as an option for communication with the server. So some other examples would be a stock exchange. Stocks are always going up and down. Real-time data is very important, and if you go to a lot of popular stock exchange websites and you open the network tab here, don't be surprised if you see some WSS URLs and WebSockets being used on those websites. Another use could be leaderboards. If you want real-time data on leaderboards, or for game scores maybe, or currency exchanges, another common use case for WebSockets. So this kind of wraps up the informative portion of my presentation. I didn't show any code that is a little bit beyond the point of this presentation, but I encourage you to look more into how to actually implement and integrate WebSockets into web applications you may be creating for school or work. WebSockets isn't extremely new. It's pretty mature at this point. I guess it's on the newer side, but nonetheless, there are plenty of libraries and packages that make creating those WebSocket connections and interactions easier for a common developer. So some future work that I'd like to look into is WebSockets with React. The principles of each, like real-time updates, seem very similar, which in my mind should lead to easy integration. Those two technologies seem to be kind of common sense to go together. I didn't look it up specifically for this presentation, but that's something that I want to look into in the future. And also, currently my my master's research, I use Ajax plenty of times throughout my code, and I'm constantly reading and writing to a database. I'm actually using MongoDB, so a NoSQL database. And so I want to experiment a little bit to see how performance changes if I integrate WebSockets with my master's research. So thanks so much. Hope you learned something useful.